The silverware clinked as my brother raised his glass. "To new beginnings," Mark said. His fiancée giggled. My parents smiled with practiced ease. Across the long mahogany table, crystal and candlelight danced. "And then, so glad you made it," Lena Mia said, tilting her wine. "Even without a +1, or income." Laughter. "Just enough to wound." I smiled back. My palms pressed against my lap, sweating through the fabric. The linen napkin felt stiff like armor I didn't ask for. Mom's eyes skimmed over me, resting instead on the server placing hors d'oeuvres. They thought I couldn't afford to eat here. "Atlanta's got an expensive," Dad chimed in. "Must be tough out there without support." His words landed like a slap wrapped in a handshake. They didn't know. I sat in silence, tracing the rim of my glass. The scent of rosemary and lemon filled the air, my signature baked into the crostini they were now dissecting. Aunt Sue asked for gluten-free. Uncle Tom wanted vegan. I had made sure both were on the menu. "And still, this duck confit is trying too hard," Carol muttered. My mother. A woman who once said, "Real women don't sweat in kitchens, they sign checks." I had been 16. I never forgot. Footsteps approached. Carlos the waiter leaned in with a practiced smile. "Is everything to your liking, Miss Brooks?" Then he turned to me louder this time, "Welcome back, owner." Silence. Forks paused midair. Mia's jaw dropped. Dad blinked. Mom's wine sloshed, trembling in her hand. I picked up my glass. Toasted the air, smiled. "Would you speak up or let the silence prove them wrong? Where are you listening from? Has anyone ever erased your worth only to choke on your truth?" Subscribe to EN Reddit Story for more tales of justice, healing, and quiet revenge. The scent of cinnamon always meant safety. Even when the world outside felt too loud, too judgmental. Rosa's kitchen was a quiet rebellion. She didn't raise her voice. She raised dough, coaxed butter into layers, and taught me to listen with my hands. I was 10 the first time I wandered in with bare feet and curiosity. The marble tiles sent chills up my legs, but the warmth from the oven made me stay. My Sunday dress was still starched, but I didn't care if flour stuck to it. I watched Rosa press her knuckles into the dough, the soft rhythm calming, something I didn't know needed calming. "Want to try?" she whispered, offering a ball of dough like it was sacred. I nodded, heart pounding. She smiled. "Then don't let your mama see you." Mama didn't believe in kitchens for girls like me. Charleston women host, they don't stir, she used to say. She thought ambition belonged in pearls and spreadsheets, not in pastries and pre-dawn sweat. The first time she caught me in Rosa's apron, I remember the look, not anger, but disappointment. "You'll never attract the right man smelling like yeast," she said. I hadn't thought about attraction. I just wanted to make something that didn't disappear when people left the room. Rosa became my anchor. When school felt heavy, when Mark aced another exam, when Mia brought home trophies and compliments, I'd find my way to Rosa's kitchen. Her hands were strong, her voice soft. She called me Little Spoon and said I had baker's eyes. I didn't know what that meant, but I held on to it like a secret. I remember the softness of her scarf, how it smelled faintly of nutmeg. How she hummed while whisking. How she taught me to taste with my eyes closed. Everything about her was a slow defiance against the world I was expected to inherit. Mark had the Brooks jawline and the Brooks future. He was already enrolled in finance camp by 15. Mia had the dresses, the charm, and a smile that turned heads at every garden party. And me, I had smudged notebooks with chocolate fingerprints. Torn recipe pages I tucked beneath my mattress. Dreams nobody applauded. No one asked what I loved. No one noticed the cakes I left in the fridge or the sugar cookies arranged with care. At Sunday brunches, they'd pass over them for store-bought eclairs Mama approved. I once overheard her say, "Lena's little hobby, she'll grow out of it." I didn't. When Rosa passed in 2020, I wasn't there. I had been in Savannah 3 years already, rebuilding something no one acknowledged. Mama didn't call. She sent a text, "She's gone. Thought you should know." That was it. No memories shared, no funeral invite, just silence. Just another message I didn't respond to. I tried to be the daughter they imagined. Columbia University. Economics major. Dad had shaken my hand the day I left. Make us proud. Mom packed my bag with cardigans and silence. No kitchen tools, no recipe cards, just expectations stitched into every hem. The dorm smelled like bleach and strangers. I stared at the ceiling most nights wide awake while my roommate snored. I memorized textbook terms but forgot who I was. There were no mixers. No sugar, no flour. My hands felt useless. My mind untethered. Every cafe I passed on Broadway called to something buried. I'd press my nose to the glass just to watch someone whisk something anything. I skipped parties. I skipped sleep. I skipped who they wanted me to become. And when I walked into the registrar's office and signed the withdrawal papers, I didn't hesitate. I didn't cry. I just breathed for the first time in weeks. I didn't call home. What could I say? That their plan felt like drowning in luxury. That numbers on spreadsheets would never taste like browned butter or orange zest. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. Thick cardstock. No return address. Inside the voided tuition check. No signature. No note. Just silence pressed between money and pride. That was the day I knew I was truly alone. I moved to Atlanta. My apartment had peeling paint, a leaky faucet, and a window that stuck shut in summer. But the stove worked. And that was enough. I worked mornings at a hotel breakfast bar. Poured lukewarm coffee, smiled at businessmen who never tipped. Then changed uniforms in the bathroom and biked across town to a bakery where the air smelled like almond and hope. They didn't care about my last name. Didn't ask about GPA or family. Only question, can you work hard? My first day, I burned a tray of croissants. My second, I over-whipped cream until it curdled. But on the third day, the head baker nodded once and said, "You've got hands. Let them learn." And they did. My palms blistered. My wrists ached. But the calluses felt honest. Sometimes I'd sleep sitting up still in my apron, arms folded like armor, but I woke with purpose. Even on the days I earned less than I spent, I knew something was building. Friday nights became sacred. When the world went out dancing, I sat cross-legged on linoleum icing cinnamon rolls for Saturday's rush. The glaze always reminded me of Rosa. I missed her. Missed her hum. Her stories. Her belief in me. I wished she could have seen me then, tired but alive. One night, covered in flour, I opened my email. Subject line: Savannah apprenticeship opportunity. Are you ready? I didn't know what waited on the other side of that message, but I clicked, and I whispered to myself, "It's time." Savannah smelled like salt and something older than memory. The air had weight to it, soft but persistent, like it didn't want you to forget where you were. The bakery was tucked behind a dusty bookstore. No sign, no fancy menu, no social media. Just the quiet clatter of trays before sunrise and the scent of peaches that drifted into the street. My first day, Carla, the owner, looked me over and tossed me an apron that had seen better decades. "You're not here to impress. You're here to survive," she said. And that became our silent contract. Carla didn't believe in praise. She believed in performance. No small talk, no hand-holding, just 3, 4, 5 a.m. alarms, blistered palms, and the kind of exhaustion that somehow made you feel clean. We made the same 7 pastries every single morning. No substitutions, no excuses. Peach scones, lavender eclairs, brioche rolls. I could make them blindfolded by week 6. Sometimes after a rush, Carla would slide one across the counter. "This one's yours." Those 5 words meant more to me than anything my family had ever said. I started collecting recipe cards, handwritten, stained with cinnamon or oil. Each one a piece of something I wanted to build. By the time I turned 34, the ache for something of my own became too loud to ignore. I wasn't running away from my past anymore. I was running toward a kitchen that bore my name. That's when I saw the listing. Le Jardin. A once beautiful French bistro hidden between a bridal shop and a cigar lounge in Midtown Atlanta. The paint was chipped. The espresso machine coughed like a smoker, But the bones, God, the bones were perfect. High ceilings. Southern light. An open kitchen that seemed to call me by name. They were asking $95,000. I had exactly $12,400, a credit score held together by willpower and a banker who looked at me like I was delusional. So I pitched. I borrowed. I begged. I sold the last bracelet. Rosa gave me blue enamel with a chipped clasp. It hurt. But she would have understood. When the keys finally landed in my hand, I cried in the parking lot. Not from fear, from arrival. That first night I sat on the bare tile floor. No staff, no light. Just me, the silence, and the oven I would one day teach to sing. I wrote my name on a yellow sticky note and slapped it onto the oven door. This is mine. 3 years passed. Le Jardin bloomed. We made the cover of a local food journal. Southern Living called us a quiet force. Carlos joined full-time and called me chef with reverence. Tammy brought wildflowers. Jules never missed a shift. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a resurrection. And then, the invitation. Cream envelope. Gold trim. Mark and Sarah's engagement dinner, held at Le Jardin. They didn't know. I booked the reservation myself. No manager name. Just a request for the private dining room, 16 guests. I paid the $900 deposit in seconds. I designed every dish with surgical care, vegan starters for Aunt Sue. Gluten-free bread for Uncle Tom. A bourbon-glazed lamb for Dad, just the way he liked it. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for closure. For the quiet satisfaction of letting them taste what they once mocked. The night before the dinner, I steamed my navy dress. The zipper caught once I yanked it free like shedding old skin. Carlos met my eyes as we checked the settings. Want me to welcome them? He asked. I shook my head. Not yet, I said. Let them eat first. The front doors of Le Jardin gleamed under the low evening light. I stood just outside watching my family arrive one by one. Mark in a sharp gray suit, Mia in a flowing ivory dress that caught the breeze like a flag. Dad adjusted his collar as he stepped out of the black town car. Carol followed her heels, tapping decisively against the brick path. No one looked around, not even once. They had no idea where they were. No sense of how many times I'd bled on the tiles inside or how I'd laid every fork with my own hands in the early days. To them, this was just another trendy venue. Carlos held the door for them. He caught my eye as I lingered outside, my breath tight. You okay? He murmured. I nodded once. Just watching ghosts walk in. The dining room was aglow in candlelight, soft jazz drifting in the background. Everything was perfect down to the folded menus edged in gold. Menus I had revised 15 times in one sleepless night. Menus with no author. I stepped in last, letting the door swing closed behind me. No one noticed. Mia waved vaguely from across the table, then turned back to her phone. Dad was already sipping bourbon. Carol was scanning the wine list like a critic, lips pursed. Mark caught sight of me and smiled with that effortless ease that made him the favorite. You made it, he said, standing halfway. Did you find parking okay? I wanted to laugh. I designed the parking lot. I slid into my chair. The velvet cushion was one I'd chosen from a catalog 3 years ago, obsessing over whether the mauve shade would photograph well in evening light. Now it held me like a stranger. Mark lifted his glass. To Sarah, he said, and to family. They clinked. I didn't raise mine. The first course arrived in a delicate burst of color-beet tartlets with goat cheese and pistachio crumble. Carol poked at hers. A little too modern, she said. Aunt Sue blinked. Is this vegan? Yes, Carlos said smoothly. Per your request. Uncle Tom mumbled something about gluten. Every bite they judged had passed through my hands, through my team, through years of trial and error. And still Mia turned to Sarah, laughing. This reminds me of that place in Paris. You remember? The one that tried too hard. I stared down at my own plate. My hands were cold. But my spine stayed straight. They didn't know. Not yet. Sarah leaned toward me halfway through the second course. You live in Savannah now, right? She asked, politely cutting into the glazed lamb. Her tone was warm. Careful, she didn't mean to wound. But I heard the question behind the words. Are you still relevant? Are you still trying to make that pastry thing work? I nodded. Yes. That's cute, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Then she turned back to Mia, asking about some wedding venue in Asheville. I chewed slowly, tasting the bourbon glaze I'd tested for months. It clung to the meat, rich and balanced. Dad once told me bourbon was for men who earned their seat at the table. He didn't know I'd aged that bourbon myself in the back room for 2 years. They talked about investments, property, politics. Mia launched into a story about hosting a fundraiser in Charleston. And guess who showed up? Senator Grant's wife. Can you believe it? The table erupted in amused disbelief. No one asked me what I'd been building. No one asked if I was okay. I could have been a ghost in pearls. Carlos filled their glasses, smiling like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. He was a better actor than I ever could be. I could see the flicker in his eyes every time someone mocked a dish. He knew the whole script but waited for the final scene. Mark turned to me again. So, are you still doing those little cakes I froze? The words felt small, dismissive, like a pat on the head. They're not little, I said calmly. They pay the rent. And the staff. And the lease on this building. He laughed. Sorry, no offense. I just meant you were always creative. Creative. The word people use when they don't understand what it costs to build something from nothing. When they think ambition only counts if it comes with a suit and a title. I set down my fork. The clink echoed louder than I expected. No one noticed. They were already on to the next story, Sarah's bachelorette trip, Mia's latest spa membership. The silence in my chest was growing louder. I thought of Rosa. How she used to squeeze my hand when the house felt too cold. How she said, "You're allowed to leave the table if it doesn't feed you." I looked at the people across from me, my blood, my lineage, my past. And I realized something bitter and sharp: I wasn't one of them anymore. Not really. And maybe I never had been. The third course arrived in silence. Seared scallops over sweet corn puree with truffle oil, light, subtle, expensive. It was the dish that had put Le Jardin on the map. But now it sat in front of my father like it was a puzzle he didn't ask to solve. He sniffed it once, tapped his fork twice, then said too loud, "I just don't get why people ruin seafood with sweet sauces." My chest didn't move. I didn't blink. Carlos met my gaze from the far corner. Not yet, I told him silently. Mark was talking again, bragging about his firm's latest client. Something about real estate near Hilton Head. He mentioned Dad's connections. Mom nodded approvingly. Mia was already halfway through her second glass of wine. I looked at their faces, my brother's self-assurance, my mother's calculated elegance, my father's effortless ownership of every room. There wasn't a single crack in the surface. Not one of them saw me. I'd been invited but not included. Visible but not valuable. The girl with the little cakes. The dropout. The one they left behind. Even as they sat inside the space I had built, plate by plate, night by sleepless night, they still didn't think it belonged to me. And maybe that was the point. They weren't just eating dinner. They were reenacting the hierarchy I'd escaped years ago. Aunt Sue complained about the bathroom mirror lighting. Uncle Tom wanted different music. Mom asked if there were more traditional desserts on the menu. No one asked who had created any of this. Not one thank you. Not one glance of recognition. I felt the slow fire rise in my chest. Not rage, not even pain. Just a deep, steady burn of knowing. I had let them into my world, but I wouldn't let them stay there. Carlos began clearing the plates. Dad waved him off, joking, "Tell the chef we'll pass on the last course if it's anything weird." Carlos gave him a tight smile. Then turned to me just for a second, a question in his eyes. I nodded. It was time. He left quietly. I heard his steps fade down the hall toward the kitchen. My mother leaned across the table to Sarah. "This place is charming. You'll have to ask for the manager get the recipe for that lamb glaze. Mia snorted. Manager, please. They probably downloaded it off Pinterest. And then Carlos returned. He set down a fresh bottle of wine, poured gently, straightened. Then turned toward me and said, Chef, would you like to greet your guests now? The room didn't go silent, it froze. Every fork paused, every eye turned. Even the jazz seemed to lower its volume as if the speakers themselves were holding their breath. Carlos stepped aside. And I stood. My chair scraped gently against the floor, a sound that somehow echoed louder than any slammed door. Dad tilted his head. Mark blinked confused. Mia looked at Carlos, then at me, then back again, her wine glass frozen midair. I smoothed the front of my navy dress. Straightened my back. I didn't need to say a word. I had already said enough just by existing. Carlos nodded once, then addressed the table. On behalf of the staff, we'd like to thank you for dining with us tonight at Le Jardin. It's an honor to serve you, especially under the leadership of our executive chef, founder, and owner. He turned to me. Miss Lena Brooks. The sound that followed was not a gasp. It was quieter than that. More, stunned. Mark's mouth opened, then closed. Then opened again like a fish pulled from water. He turned to Dad as if searching for context that wasn't there. Sarah set down her fork, slowly, carefully. She looked at me not with shock but with something closer to awe. Mom was the first to speak. You're… what? Her voice was brittle. Not angry, just unprepared. Like someone finding out the maid now owns the house. I own Le Jardin, I said clearly. I designed every dish you've eaten. Paid for every bottle of wine. Trained every hand in that kitchen. Tonight was my treat. Mark let out a quiet, stunned laugh. You're kidding. His eyes scanned the room again as if trying to find proof that I was lying. But no one corrected me. Carlos stood tall behind me. Tammy peeked from the flower station, her hands still holding a stem. Jules, covered in flour, had stepped just into view from the kitchen. They were all watching. My people. My world. Mia finally found her voice. Why wouldn't you say anything? I met her eyes. Because you already said enough. No one moved. Even the flicker of candlelight seemed to still for a beat too long. For the first time in years, the room that had always belonged to them belonged to me. And they didn't know how to sit in it. They didn't know how to be the ones left in the dark. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't list my sacrifices like a ledger. The silence did the work. Sarah was the first to find her voice. You own this place. Her tone had softened. The polite veneer cracked into something more real. Yes, I said. Fully, I nodded again. Aunt Sue adjusted her napkin like it might protect her from the truth. So you're not just working here, I almost smiled. I work here every day. But I also pay the mortgage. That landed differently. It wasn't just that they were wrong. It was that their entire story of who I was no longer made sense. I watched it all crumble in their expressions, quiet, panic, forced amusement, ego shrinking without a sound. Dad leaned back, arms crossed over his chest. You said this was your treat. His voice tried to regain control, measured, dismissive. Yes, I replied. Dinner. Wine. Room. He stared, calculating. Trying to match the dropout he cut off with the woman who had just financed a four-figure meal like it was nothing. I could see the gears turning, his pride, looking old and fragile like silverware that's never used anymore. You didn't have to do that, he muttered. No, I said. I didn't. Mia sighed and leaned in. You could have just told us. You didn't have to surprise us like this. Her voice cracked just enough to reveal something hurt, maybe. Or embarrassment. I tilted my head steady. Would you have believed me? She dropped her gaze. Didn't answer. Carlos approached with the dessert menus. I caught his eye and gave a subtle shake of my head. Clear them, I said gently. We're done. He nodded. No questions. Only the soft clinking of china as plates disappeared. Mom was next. Of course she was. She folded her hands on the table, composed. almost maternal. "So, what is it you want from us, Lena?" That question landed differently. Not sharp, not cruel, just revealing. She still thought I had come for something. That all of this was a plea dressed as a power play. She didn't understand I had come with nothing to ask for. I looked at her. At all of them. "What do I want?" I paused. "Nothing, not a thing." I stood slowly. Let the weight of the moment settle without drama. "I just wanted you to taste it." And then I walked away. Not fast, not slow, just certain and lighter. The hallway outside the dining room was dim and quiet, just as I had planned. No staff loitering, no music. Just the hush of walls that knew my footsteps better than my own family ever did. I walked slowly past the wine cellar, past the photographs I'd hung myself, black and white prints of the French countryside. Nobody had asked why they were there. Nobody noticed the handwritten quote beneath the largest one. "Feed them, even if they forget who taught them to eat." I stepped into the service corridor and leaned against the wall. For the first time that night, I exhaled. I hadn't cried. I hadn't begged. I hadn't raised my voice or pointed fingers, but I had burned every illusion down without touching a match. Carlos found me a few minutes later. He didn't say anything at first. He just handed me a glass of chilled water, then leaned beside me, staring at the opposite wall. "Well," he said eventually, "that was a performance." I let out a soft laugh. "More like a closing act. Think they got the message I didn't write it for them?" He nodded, understanding more in those few words than my family had grasped in years. "They're still sitting," he added after a pause. "Some of them anyway." "I know. You want me to ask them to leave?" "No," I said. "Let them sit in it. Let them stay long enough to feel small in a room I built." There was no anger in my voice. Just truth, a quiet truth I'd earned. He glanced at me sideways. "Are you okay?" I thought about that. The old version of me would have broken by now, would have run to the bathroom, hands shaking, makeup ruined, heart caved in. But this version. She stood taller. "I think I am," I said. "For the first time in a very long time." Carlos smiled. "You hungry?" I blinked. "Actually, yeah." He led me to the back prep area where Jules had left a plate, my lemon lavender mousse chilled just right, garnished with edible violets. No candles. No speeches. Just me, a quiet corner, and a dessert I'd invented with blistered hands and bruised faith. I took the first bite, closed my eyes. It tasted like everything they never gave me. And everything I never needed from them again. The next morning, the dining room was spotless. The candles gone. The glasses polished. The silence intact. You'd never know a reckoning had unfolded here just hours ago. I stood by the windows as the light broke through, brushing against the white linen tablecloths like nothing had changed. But I had. Jules arrived first, as always. He greeted me with a nod like he always did. No pity. No congratulations. Just rhythm. "Chef," he said, like every other day. And somehow that word meant more today than ever. Tammy brought in fresh hydrangeas, blue and full. She didn't ask about last night. Just trimmed the stems, humming to herself as if to say, "You made it. You're still here." I checked my phone. No missed calls. No messages. Not from Mark. Not from Mia. Not from Mom. Just a single email from our linen vendor confirming the new shipment. I hadn't expected roses. But I also hadn't expected nothing. A part of me, small, buried, annoying, had thought maybe someone would reach out. A text. A question. A late-night email with a single line, "You okay?" But there was nothing. Their silence wasn't empty, it was deliberate. I opened the office, flicked on the light, and sat behind my desk. My name was etched on the plaque, Lena Brooks, executive chef. I ran my thumb across the engraving. Once I dreamed they would be proud of that. Now I was simply tired of dreaming. I pulled out my notebook, the old one with a leather cover Rosa had given me for my 25th birthday. Inside, scribbled in flour-smudged ink, was her note. For recipes, yes. But also for remembering who you are when the world tries to forget you. That morning I wrote only one line, they saw it. And they still turned away. 3 days passed. Not a call, not a single word. No one asked if I was free for coffee. No one forwarded wedding photos. No one followed up on the dinner. It wasn't that they were mad. It was worse than that. They were resetting the narrative. Pretending it hadn't happened. Rewriting me back out of the frame. I became the glitch in their story. The girl who made them uncomfortable in their own skin. I checked Sarah's Instagram out of curiosity. She'd posted a photo from the engagement dinner captioned, "Magical night with the best people." ID number blessed number family. I looked at the image. Mark. Mia. Mom. Dad. Aunt Sue. A long table candlelit smiles. I wasn't in it, not cropped out, just never there. I stared for too long. Not out of pain. Out of recognition. That's who I had always been to them, the one on the edge. The one whose presence they tolerated but never celebrated. My phone buzzed. A message from Carla, my old mentor in Savannah. Carla heard about the dinner. Quiet justice suits you. Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. I stared at her words, letting them rest on my screen like a warm hand. My throat tightened. Not because of grief, but because of relief. Someone saw me. Someone who mattered. Someone who knew how hard it was to rise when no one offered a hand. I typed back me. They still don't know what to do with me. She replied almost instantly. Carla. That's because they didn't build you, so they can't claim you, and that terrifies them. I swallowed. She was right. They could handle a failure. They could even pity one. But a woman who succeeded without them, a woman who didn't need their seat at the table. That was unacceptable. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea that tasted like memory. Fresh mint, a twist of lemon, no sugar, just like Rosa used to make on long aching afternoons. Back when I was too tired to speak but too restless to sit still. The wood beneath me still held the warmth of the day. I curled my toes into it like it could steady me. It did. Savannah moved slow around me. The trees shifted gently. The streetlights hummed like background noise. My phone stayed dark beside me on the table. No calls, no texts. Not even a question mark blinking. They hadn't reached out, and deep down I understood they wouldn't. Not now, not ever. For years I had held that hope like a flickering match, kept shielding it from wind, from truth, from the slow erosion of reality. Tonight I let it burn out, and the darkness that followed, it wasn't scary. It was honest. It didn't rush in with cruelty. It just settled. Like dust after a storm. I watched it. Listened to it. And then I breathed. A full breath. The kind you don't know you've been starving for until it fills your chest. I wasn't grieving. I wasn't waiting. I wasn't wondering if they'd come back with softer eyes. I was still. And I was free. The pain didn't leave with a bang. It faded like a bruise that used to throb but now just exists. Inside, tomorrow waited. Ovens to preheat. Pastries to mix. A team that showed up for me in flour and fire, not in blood. But I didn't rush in, because this moment belonged to me. I ran my thumb along the chipped rim of my teacup. Once I would have thrown it away. Now I admired it. Its imperfection. Its proof. It had survived something. So had I. I raised my glass to the night sky. A silent toast. To the girl who stopped waiting to be welcomed. And built her own place instead. It started with a silence that felt off. Not the usual kind, not the quiet of people moving on. But the kind of silence that's filled with doors closing softly but deliberately. An email I was expecting never arrived. Then a flower shipment was redirected without notice. A local vendor who once greeted me with warmth now replied with one-line answers and, "Sorry, we're fully booked." At first I brushed it off. Holidays. Delays. Miscommunications. It's a busy season, I told myself, but then came the Winthrop wedding. They'd booked a full cake tasting 5 tiers fondant detailing delivery across county lines. We'd started prepping designs. I'd even sourced a rare orchid from a Florida grower. Then the assistant called. The bride changed her vision. She's going in a new direction. But I'd seen the bride's Pinterest board. I was her direction. That night I stared at my phone far too long. The screen blank. No cancellations. No complaints. Just erasure. Tammy noticed it too. "You see the new press release?" she asked, tapping her phone. "City Awards Gala. You were on last year's committee list." I hadn't seen it. I wasn't on it. I always was. It wasn't just forgetfulness. It was methodical omission. One thread at a time being pulled, and I knew exactly where the seam had started to rip. That dinner, that name, that moment. I had stepped into the light and called myself what I was: owner. Chef. Success without their permission. And they didn't applaud. They retaliated. Quietly. Efficiently. With just enough deniability to feel polite. Charleston society has its own language, and silence is often the sharpest word. But I had survived worse. And I wasn't here to play victim. I had work to do. I began documenting everything. Email chains, booking logs, notes from conversations that shifted tone mid-sentence. A Google folder named Simply Storm Prep. Carlos raised an eyebrow when he saw me scanning paper invoices manually. "You expecting a storm?" "Not yet," I said. "But I'll be ready if it comes." He didn't laugh. He just nodded. Because he knew. When people don't clap for you, sometimes it's because they're sharpening knives behind the curtain. I called Lena, an attorney I'd catered for years ago, sharp, discreet, fierce, and flats. We met at a small cafe off King Street. No makeup. No pretense. Just facts. "Quiet sabotage?" she asked, scribbling into her notepad. "Family?" I nodded. She didn't flinch. She flipped to a clean page. "Then we don't play loud," she said. "We play smart." Lena's legal pad filled quickly. She asked clear questions. Took sharp notes. Didn't soften a single thing. "How many vendors have dropped in the last 6 weeks?" 4, I said. "Any direct accusations?" Number. "Yes." "Delays, disinterest. Calls that used to be returned in minutes now take days, if at all." She tapped her pen once. "What's your instinct that this isn't random?" She nodded. "We're not fighting this out loud. You're going to keep being who you are. Let them assume you're not watching. But behind that we build a net." She called it documented resilience. A strategy not for vengeance but for defense. Because what they feared most was not that I'd fight, but that I'd outlast them. Quietly. With proof. Lena gave me templates. Language for contracts, email trackers. Tips for logging tone shifts, not just cancellations. "You don't need a scene," she said, closing her folder. "You need structure." And I did. God, I did. Because every part of me that had once craved validation now craved peace. And peace needed protection. I returned to the bakery with a new kind of focus. The kind that doesn't panic. The kind that prepares. I reorganized files. Updated staff permissions. Backed up financial records in 3 separate drives. Carlos watched me from the bar as I labeled another binder. "You going full CIA on us?" he joked, half smiling. "Just making sure no one can twist my story," I said. He nodded slowly. "Good, because they'll try." And we both knew who they was. The calls from family had stopped entirely. No fallout. No confrontation. Just a clean, curated silence. It was their favorite weapon. Pretend she doesn't exist. And maybe the story dies. But I'd learned something in that void. Silence doesn't mean surrender. It can mean planning. It can mean strength. It can mean watch me anyway. So I leaned into my quiet. I stopped answering questions that came from the wrong mouths. I stopped softening my truth just to keep a seat at a table I no longer sat at. I wasn't at war, but I was fortified. And while they pretended not to see me, I was building a record they couldn't erase. That Sunday, I stood in the kitchen long after the team had gone home. The ovens had cooled, the lights dimmed to soft amber. The quiet wasn't haunting anymore. It was mine. I walked the floor with a pen and a clipboard. Checked the inventory, initialed the logs. Not because I had to, but because this space grounded me. It reminded me that the work was still real even if their silence wasn't. Outside the street was hushed. Charleston in late spring carried the scent of jasmine and wet brick. The kind of air that told you something was ending, or just beginning. I made a pot of chamomile tea in the back. Poured it into the blue ceramic mug I never let anyone else use. The one Rosa gave me when I opened Le Jardin. On the side, faded now, was a single word: steady. I wrapped my hands around it and breathed. I thought about everything they had taken. Access. Applause. Approval. And then I thought about everything I still had. My name on the lease. My recipe in the display case. My people who showed up before sunrise and stayed through the storm. I didn't need a spotlight. I didn't need the table anymore. I had built the kitchen. Carlos had left a sticky note by the register: brunch sold out again. You did that, I smiled. That was what mattered now. Not who watched, but who showed up. The next morning, I had a meeting with Lena scheduled. She would bring paperwork. Legal protections. New language for contracts. Nothing flashy, just boundaries. Quiet lines drawn in ink. They would never know the work I put in. That was fine. They didn't have to. The only legacy I cared about now was one I could leave clean, protected, and untouchable. As I turned off the lights, I glanced at the empty tables, each one once a battlefield. Now just places where people came to taste something honest. I locked the door, slipped the key into my pocket. And for the first time in months, I didn't look back. The message came on a Tuesday. Clean subject line. No punctuation. Brooks Family Foundation. Annual gala invitation. It was a mass email sent through some third-party service. The kind used for donors and socialites. People you shake hands with but never look in the eye. There was no personal greeting. No "Hi, Lena." No acknowledgement that we'd shared a table. Or a history. Or blood. Just a date. A time. A dress code. Black tie optional, as if dignity could be optional too. I stared at the screen for a long time. Longer than I wanted to. Not because I was tempted, but because the audacity stunned me. No one had reached out since the dinner. Not Mark. Not Mia. Not even my mother. And yet here they were, slipping me into the guest list like nothing happened, like I hadn't been invisible for years. Like my name wasn't an afterthought until it became inconvenient to ignore. I didn't reply, didn't delete it either. I let it sit. A digital dare. Later that night, I walked into Le Jardin after hours. The lights dimmed low, the air still laced with lavender and heat from the ovens. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the bar, and pulled out the leather notebook. The one Rosa gave me before she passed. The one I filled with more than recipes, I filled it with truths. I flipped past pages of chiffon cake ratios and tart shell notes. Landed on a blank page. And wrote 3 words in the center. Take it back. Not the invitation, not the gala. But the version of myself they tried to define. The girl who stayed quiet to avoid embarrassment. The woman who worked twice as hard to earn half the credit. The chef they pretended not to see until she made headlines. I was done performing humility for people who never respected me. This time, if I walked into that room, it wouldn't be to belong, it would be to shift gravity. I called Lena. Told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and then said, "We don't just attend. We arrive with purpose." I could hear the smile in her voice. It wasn't smug, it was strategic, and for the first time in weeks I didn't feel defensive. I felt ready. I didn't want revenge. I wanted authorship. They had been writing over my name for years. Now I was picking up the pen. Lena didn't ask for drama. She asked for logistics. Time, guest list. Media, legacy. What's the goal? Her pen moved fast. Her tone was calm. She treated it like a case file. But for me it wasn't a case, it was my life. We sat in the back corner of a wine bar in Mount Pleasant. Dim lights, brick walls. No one knew us. That was the point. I don't want to make a scene, I said. Lana looked up. Good, we're not planning noise, we're planning memory. I sipped my drink slowly. She leaned in. You walk in and they don't get to rewrite you again. They don't get to reduce you back to silence. I nodded. This isn't just a dinner, she said. It's narrative reclamation. I laughed, but quietly. Leave it to a lawyer to make truth sound like strategy. But she was right. This time I wasn't the wounded outsider they pitied. I was the success they couldn't deny. And I wasn't coming to ask for a seat. I was coming to bring weight to the one I already earned. I didn't want press. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted presence. The kind that didn't need to raise its voice to be undeniable. Lana laid out the practical steps. You need someone with you. Not backup witness. She meant someone calm, grounded. Not family. Someone who wouldn't shrink when the room tried to twist itself around me. Carlos came to mind. But I already knew what he'd say. This is your story. Go alone but don't go small. And maybe that was the plan. Go alone but not alone inside. Dress choice. Arrival time. Intentional silence. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about never letting them reduce me again. I told Lana I'd RSVP. And I would. But I wouldn't walk in as someone hoping to be included. I'd walk in as the result of every time they left me out. Lana closed her notepad. Don't let them see you flinch. I won't. Because this time I wasn't just stepping into their room. I was taking the room with me. The day before the gala, I closed the bakery early. Not for nerves, for clarity. I needed space. Not to rehearse, but to remember. I stood in the kitchen long after the ovens cooled. Ran my fingers over the counter Rosa once called your altar. I had spent more time in this room than in any house we'd ever lived in. More honest hours, more earned minutes. My navy suit hung by the window. Tailored. Clean, sharp. No sequins. No silk. No soft edges. Just structure. And intent. I wasn't showing up to sparkle. I was showing up to say, you don't get to edit me anymore. At home, I laid everything out on the bed clutch. Keys. RSVP card. One of my business cards from Le Jardin. Not to hand out, to hold like a compass. Carlos stopped by briefly with a bouquet. No words. Just flowers. Cream-colored roses wrapped in parchment and steadiness. Wear what feels like armor, he said. Then left. So I did. Simple heels. Dark red lipstick. A single gold pin Rosa gave me. Not flashy. But it had weight. I looked at myself in the mirror. Not with hope. With certainty. I wasn't going to be louder. I was going to be unmistakable. They could still try to talk over me. They could still shift chairs, crop photos, or change tone mid-sentence. But what they couldn't do was unmake what I had already made. I didn't walk into their world anymore hoping to belong. I was walking in to remind them I had already arrived. The car pulled up at 6:41. I stepped inside without hesitation. No music. Just the steady hum of forward motion. As we crossed the bridge into downtown Charleston, I looked out at the water, dark. Still. Powerful beneath the surface. It didn't need to roar to carry weight. Neither did I. The Brooks Foundation Gala was held at the Charleston Pavilion. The building shimmered under spotlights, its white columns glowing like teeth in the dark. Marble floors. Crystal chandeliers. A floral installation that probably cost more than a small car. Everything designed to say, we are still powerful. I stepped out of the car at exactly 7:12 p.m. I hadn't planned it that precisely. But somehow it felt right, not too early to seem eager. Not too late to be dismissive. Just enough to interrupt the rhythm of their evening. A valet opened the door. Good evening, ma'am. I nodded, my heels clicked against the pavement steady measured. I felt every step. Not like nerves, like intention. Inside the room buzzed with money, laughter, perfume, the rustle of silk and polished accents. People hugged too tightly, kissed, too lightly, smiled too long. I walked past the check-in table. Name please, Lena Brooks. The woman blinked, then looked again. She didn't ask for clarification, she just nodded. Right this way. I didn't need to be escorted. I knew this room. I had grown up watching it from corners. Balancing glasses. Quiet. Invisible. Not tonight. Tonight I was unmistakable. Mia stood beneath the chandelier surrounded by news anchors and women who used the word darling like punctuation. She wore silver sequins and confidence. But when she saw me, her smile froze. It recovered too fast. Mark was across the room, drink in hand. His eyes met mine. He raised his glass. I didn't raise mine back. Dad stood with 2 city councilmen. His spine stiffened when he saw me. Mom stared openly. Not cruel, just calculating. One of the caterers offered me champagne. This time I took it. Not because I needed it, because I could. Each step I took was deliberate. Each glance I received noted. I wasn't here to make a scene, I was here to be seen on my terms. On the terrace, I finally paused. The air outside was cooler. The string quartet played something soft. Charleston twinkled beyond the railing. Mark found me there. You came, he said. I turned. Was I not supposed to? He hesitated. No, After dinner I wasn't sure. I tilted my head. Weren't sure I'd come or weren't sure I'd walk in like this. He gave a quiet laugh. You look different. I'm not. He lowered his voice. You're not mad. I sipped my drink. You don't have to be furious to be finished. Mark leaned on the balcony railing beside me. He didn't speak at first, and for once the silence didn't feel like evasion. It felt like acknowledgement. He used to fill silence with noise. Always the clever one. The closer. The center of every table. But tonight he stood beside me like someone who wasn't sure where to begin. I didn't mean to shut you out, he said eventually. I didn't look at him. You didn't have to mean it, I replied. You just had to let it happen. He exhaled. It sounded like regret, but not enough to undo anything. I always thought you were strong. Stronger than us. Than me. That made me turn. Being strong doesn't mean I didn't need help. It just means I learned how to live without it. His face tightened. His tux looked expensive, but something in his posture sagged like he knew the fabric couldn't hold everything. I thought if you really needed something you'd ask. I laughed. Once. Sharp. Small. Mark, I did ask. You just weren't listening. None of you were. He went quiet again. The wind picked up over the water. I don't know what to say to make it right, he admitted. You can't, I said simply. And that's the truth I've made peace with. He nodded slowly. I saw your team. At Les Jardins. They look at you like you built the world they stand on. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. I did, I said. He smiled bittersweet. I believe you. I could see he meant it. For the first time in years, there was no envy in his face. Just understanding. Too late maybe. But real. I think Mom's scared of you now, he added. She should be. We both laughed light, tired laughter. Not cruel, not mocking. Just 2 siblings standing in the ruins of what was never really family. Are you going back in? He asked. No, I said. I've already arrived, and then I walked. Not toward the lights. Not toward the stage. Toward the edge of the garden. Where no one else was looking. Where the air didn't perform. I passed the photo arch roses woven into a perfect circle. They looked soft in the dark, but I knew better. They were silk. The stems plastic. The illusion beautiful. But hollow. And yet, the structure held. So did I. I took the long way out. Past the sculpture hall. Past the dessert table. Past groups of people I used to know but who never really knew me. No one stopped me, no one called my name. But heads turned. And that was enough. The hush that followed me wasn't fear. It wasn't admiration, it was realization. They finally saw the version of me they couldn't control. The one they had edited out of family photos. The one they had labeled stubborn emotional too much. Now I was just undeniable. Outside, the air wrapped around me like something honest. Cool, salted. Still. My car was waiting. I didn't rush. Didn't check my phone. Didn't need to look back at the building glowing behind me like a set piece. The valet opened the door. "Evening, Miss Brooks," he said with a soft smile. The way he said it, no confusion, no hesitation, struck me. Not miss. Not ma'am. But my name. Fully. He saw me. Just as I was. And that felt like closure. I slid into the seat and shut the door behind me. No fanfare. Just the quiet sound of something finishing without breaking. As the car pulled away, I glanced out the window one last time. Inside, the gala continued. Laughter, light. The same choreography they'd always known. But they would remember tonight. Not because I made a scene, but because I didn't need to. I had become the gravity they had tried to deny, the presence they couldn't ignore anymore. And the best part, I didn't need them to say it out loud. I knew who I was. Back at the bakery, the hallway light was still on. Tammy had left a sticky note on the counter, sold out by noon. Again. Also, the new bride wants your lemon mousse. I smiled, peeled off the note, stuck it on the fridge beside the others. My fridge was full of proof. Not awards, not applause, just moments that mattered. Small victories. Built, not given. I poured myself a glass of water, took off my shoes. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to brace for the next thing. Because I had already walked through the fire. And I didn't just survive. I made something from the ashes. Mornings were quiet again. Not silent, not empty, just honest. The kind of quiet that didn't ache anymore. Not the type filled with waiting or regret, but the kind that let you breathe with both feet on the ground. At Le Jardin, the rhythm resumed like it never missed a beat. The ovens clicked on at 5:07 a.m., my hands already moving before the sun even considered rising. The hum of the mixer, the smell of cardamom in the air, the clink of cooling trays. It was music only I heard. And I didn't need applause anymore to believe it was beautiful. Jules still whistled off-key. Tammy still argued with the flower buckets like they were old friends. Carlos poured coffee with the same reverence a priest reserves for wine. No one talked about the gala. No one asked. They didn't need to. But Carlos passed behind me once, placed a small lemon tart on my station, and whispered, "You made the whole room bend," without raising your voice. Then walked away. That was enough. Orders kept coming. The kitchen stayed full. The world outside still had opinions, so many of them. But inside the space, I had built something stronger than praise. Belonging. Not borrowed. Not begged for. Built. Sometimes the pain still echoed in strange ways. When I saw a pearl necklace in a magazine spread. When someone mentioned family trusts in passing. When my inbox showed a blank space where my mother's number used to live. But healing doesn't mean erasing. It means learning to hold memory without letting it choke you. It means walking through familiar streets and not bracing for the slap of being unseen. It means smiling anyway. One morning, I found a small envelope tucked behind the staff tip jar. No return address. Just a photo of wind-blown hydrangeas. On the back, in handwriting I knew better than my own. "You were right to leave the door closed." No signature, but it didn't need one. I pressed it to my chest for a moment. Not because it made everything okay, but because it confirmed what I already knew. Sometimes the real power is in not turning around when they finally call your name. I pinned it next to the old group photo of us, in front of Le Jardin's first window display. Me, flower-stained and radiant. My people grinning behind me. The family I chose, the family that stayed. Legacy isn't something you wait for, it's something you live, and I was finally living it. Fully. Quietly. Mine. I began to measure time differently. Not by the absence of texts, Not by holidays missed or names omitted from invitations, but by how deeply I slept. By the way my shoulders stayed soft through a Sunday. By the number of mornings I woke without rehearsing comebacks to people who no longer had access to me. I used to count pain in sharp exact details voicemails ignored. Glances that slid past me like I was wallpaper. Conversations paused when I entered the room. The passive-aggressive kindness that always came dressed in pearls. Now I counted legacy in other ways. In the 19-year-old who asked to work weekends, then stayed late to learn how to temper chocolate. In the single mother who brought her daughter in every Saturday for a slice of our blood orange tart, her brave slice she called it. In the local college professor who wrote in our guest book, "This is what kindness tastes like." None of them knew what I had lost. They just experienced what I had chosen to create. And that was enough. Le Jardin had become more than a bakery. It had become a threshold. Proof that you can be written out of someone else's inheritance and still leave behind something far more permanent. One afternoon, I was behind the counter balancing invoices when a woman walked in mid-50s gray wool dress pearl studs. Elaine. My father's wife. The woman who sat across from the lawyer's desk when my name wasn't spoken. The woman who let that silence sit like it was justified. She didn't ask for me. She ordered an espresso. Saturday at the far window like any customer. Before leaving, she approached the counter. Her eyes lingered on the dessert display, then moved up to meet mine. She didn't flinch. She didn't smile either. He would have liked the lemon mousse, she said. Not a question, not a compliment, just a sentence. Then she placed a 20 in the tip jar and walked out. No apology. No explanation. No plea for forgiveness. Just presence. And then absence. And strangely, that was enough. I didn't chase after her. Didn't try to decode the tone. I simply looked down at the note and thought, some debts are paid in silence. Because not all closure comes gift-wrapped. Sometimes it arrives like a draft through a locked door, unexpected, cold but final. And this time I didn't reach for warmth. I let the wind pass through. The summer I turned 40, I bought the cottage by the marsh. The one I used to bike past on quiet Sunday evenings. It had peeling white shutters and a crooked mailbox, but the view stretched wide across the water, open, unbothered. It wasn't large, it didn't need to be. Just enough space for a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon, a porch that held silence like a secret, and a garden full of herbs that didn't ask for permission to grow. I furnished it slowly. Second-hand books. Thrifted dishes. Nothing matched, but everything mattered. I picked each piece like I had picked each part of my life, deliberately, patiently, without explanation. People still talked. Sometimes a journalist reached out. Sometimes a relative sent a thinking of you email with a link to some family event I hadn't been invited to. I didn't ignore them. I just didn't need them. Legacy had taken on a new shape. Not what you're given. Not even what you fight for. But what survives long after the noise dies down. At Le Jardin we launched a mentorship program. Small at first, 3 young women, 2 evenings a week. Not just baking. Budgeting. Invoicing. Owning, teaching them not just to be skilled but to be seen. We called it the Rosa Table. Every woman who walked through that door got their name burned into a wooden board that hung near the register. Not for show. For memory. One afternoon a girl, maybe 20, asked if I ever wished I'd fought louder. If I ever regretted staying quiet. I thought about that. Then I said I didn't stay quiet, I stayed steady. And sometimes that's the loudest thing a woman can do. She wrote it down in the corner of her notebook. In that moment, I knew she would be just fine. On the porch that night, with a breeze curling through the screen door and a cup of tea cooling in my hand, I finally understood what Rosa meant when she said, "Not every story needs a villain, just a woman who doesn't vanish." I hadn't vanished. I had arrived. On my terms. And left the door open just wide enough for the next girl. Sometimes justice doesn't look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like walking away calm, clear, and with your name still intact. Sometimes legacy isn't passed down. It's rebuilt from scratch, flour on your hands, truth in your spine, and quiet power in every choice. If you've ever been erased, overlooked, or underestimated, this story is yours too. You're not alone. You don't need permission. And you don't have to shout to be heard. Where are you listening from? Have you ever walked away to protect your peace? What did you rebuild once you stopped asking to be seen? Share your story below. We're listening. Always. Subscribe to Reddit Story for more true stories of justice, closure, and quiet strength from women just like you.